"Stay off my property, because the next piece of paper you touch could change everything you thought you owned." I still remember the exact sound that morning. The low rumble of a diesel engine rolled across my land before the sun had fully cleared the mountains. The smell of fresh asphalt and cold morning air mixed together as I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee in my hand. For a few seconds, I thought I was looking at the wrong place. Then I saw the orange survey flags, the stacks of lumber, and the white sign being planted into the ground. Silver Creek Estates Community Access. My property. My driveway. My land. And someone else was claiming it. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I spent most of my life believing that if you worked hard, followed the rules, and treated people fairly, they would do the same in return. I inherited this 12-acre piece of Colorado land from my father, a quiet man who spent 40 years building a life with his own hands. I can still remember the smell of fresh-cut wood from the old workshop behind the house, the sound of his boots walking across the gravel path, and the way he would always check the fence line every Sunday morning. To him, a property line was more than a mark on a map. It was a promise that what you built and protected mattered. That morning, I walked down the gravel driveway and saw a crew working near the edge of my land. A woman in a tailored jacket stood beside them, holding a clipboard like it gave her authority over everything around her. Victoria Harrington, the president of Silver Creek Estates HOA. She looked at me, smiled politely, and said, "Ethan, perfect timing. We're improving access for the community." I looked at the sign behind her. Then I looked at the workers standing on my property. "You're building on my land," I said. Victoria tilted her head as if I had misunderstood something simple. "This area benefits everyone. The HOA has approved the project." That was the moment I realized she wasn't asking for permission. She believed permission was something she could create after the fact. I took a breath, stayed calm, and pointed to the boundary marker near the old oak tree. "This is private property. I need you and your team to leave." She glanced at the marker and gave a small laugh. Not a loud one. The kind that tells you someone thinks they already won. "Ethan, you might want to review your community documents," she said. "A lot has changed around here." She didn't know I had already reviewed every document. She didn't know my father's old records were carefully stored away. She didn't know the land beneath her expensive shoes had a history that went back decades. And most importantly, she didn't know that this was not my first warning. It was hers. Because before that morning, I had already sent Victoria a letter telling her to stay off my property. She ignored it. She believed a title, a clipboard, and an HOA logo were stronger than ownership. But she was about to learn something important. Real authority does not come from a position. It comes from the truth behind the paperwork. And she had no idea what was waiting inside mine. The morning after I found Victoria Harrington standing on my land, I did something she clearly did not expect. I did not shout. I did not argue. I simply walked back inside, opened the old wooden cabinet in my office, and pulled out a folder that had been untouched for years. That folder carried more history than any sign, any clipboard, or any HOA title could ever erase. My father kept everything organized. He was the kind of man who saved every receipt, every survey, and every document because he believed details mattered. The folder was worn around the edges, the paper inside slightly yellow from time, but every page told the same story. This land belonged to our family. 12 acres of Colorado hillside, surrounded by pine trees, open fields, and the kind of quiet that most people spend years searching for. My father bought the property in 1984 when this area was nothing like it is today. There were no perfect rows of houses, no community entrance signs, and no HOA meetings deciding what people could do with their own property. There was just land. Honest, open land. I grew up learning that every part of it had meaning. The old oak tree near the western boundary was where my father taught me how to measure distance with a simple tape measure. The small workshop behind the house was where I learned how to repair tools and fix things instead of replacing them. Even the gravel driveway had memories attached to it. I could still hear the sound of my father's old pickup truck rolling over those stones every evening when he came home from work. After he passed away, managing this property became my responsibility. I never saw it as just an investment. It was a connection to the person who taught me patience, honesty, and responsibility. That was why Victoria's actions bothered me so much. It was not just about a fence or a sign. It was about someone deciding that my family's history could be rewritten with a few signatures and a community logo. I spent that afternoon reviewing every document again. Property records, survey maps, tax documents. Everything was exactly where it should be. Then I found something else. A detailed survey from 1984 showing the exact boundary lines, including the area where Victoria's crew had started their project. The same area she called a community improvement zone was clearly marked as private property. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window toward the workers still gathering materials near the edge of my land. I felt the frustration building, but I also remembered something my father always said. When someone wants you to react emotionally, they are usually hoping you stop thinking clearly. So I made a decision. I would not fight Victoria the way she expected. I would not give her a dramatic argument she could use to make herself look like the victim. Instead, I would document everything. Every visit, every message, every time someone stepped across that property line. Because people who believe they are untouchable often make the same mistake. They stop paying attention to the evidence they are creating. And Victoria Harrington was already leaving a trail. She just had not realized it yet. Victoria Harrington returned 2 days later, but this time she did not come alone. I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway before I saw the vehicles through the window. The morning air was cool, and the smell of pine trees mixed with fresh coffee as I watched 3 people step out near the edge of my property. Victoria carried the same clipboard as before, the same confident posture, the same expression that said she believed every conversation was already decided in her favor. Beside her were 2 members of the Silver Creek Estates HOA board. They looked around my land like they were inspecting something that already belonged to them. I walked outside and closed the door behind me. "Good morning," I said. Victoria smiled. "Ethan, we are here to make sure there is no misunderstanding." I almost laughed at that word. Misunderstanding. That was the word people used when they wanted to make a serious problem sound smaller than it was. She handed me a document. It was a notice from the HOA claiming that the area near my driveway had become part of a community improvement project. According to them, the new access path would improve property values for everyone nearby. I looked at the paper, then back at Victoria. "This does not change ownership," I said. "This is still private property." Her smile became tighter. "You are focusing on technical details, Ethan. We are thinking about the bigger picture." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. To Victoria, my property was not a place with history. It was an empty space waiting for someone else to decide its purpose. I pointed toward the boundary marker near the old oak tree. "That is the bigger picture. The property line is right there." One of the board members looked uncomfortable. He glanced at the document in his hand and then at the marker, but Victoria did not move. She stepped closer to the edge of the driveway and said, "The community has invested time and money into this plan. We cannot just stop because one person disagrees." One person. That was how she saw me. Not as the owner. Not as the person responsible for this land. Just an obstacle. I calmly repeated the same thing I had already told her before. "You need to keep your team off my property." For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence where you can hear the wind moving through the trees. Victoria looked at me and nodded slowly. "I think you will understand once this moves forward." Then she turned around and walked back to her vehicle. That was the moment I knew she was not going to listen. She had been warned. She had seen the documents. She had stood directly beside the property marker. And she still believed she could continue. After they left, I went back inside and opened my computer. I created a folder and started organizing everything. The first letter I sent, the HOA notices, the survey records, the photos, the dates and times of every visit. I was not preparing for an argument. I was preparing a record. Because there is a difference between someone making a mistake and someone choosing to ignore the truth. Victoria had made her choice. Now I was going to make mine. I would let the facts speak louder than she ever could. The next week started quietly, which almost made it feel more dangerous. I learned that when someone believes they have unlimited authority, they do not always rush. Sometimes they move slowly because they are convinced nobody can stop them. Every morning, I checked the edge of my property before starting my day. The old oak tree stood exactly where it always had. The gravel driveway still curved toward the house, and the mountain air still carried that familiar smell of pine and fresh earth. But something had changed. There were new survey flags appearing along the boundary line. Small orange markers pushed into the ground like someone was trying to redraw a map without asking the person who owned it. I documented every one. A photo, a date, a location. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Then, on Thursday afternoon, I received another envelope from Silver Creek Estates. The paper was thick, the kind of paper designed to make people nervous before they even read the first sentence. Inside was a notice claiming I was interfering with a community project. They requested access to my land for necessary improvements and mentioned possible consequences if I continued to delay their plans. I read the letter twice, not because I was confused, because I wanted to understand how comfortable someone could become with ignoring reality. Victoria was not asking anymore. She was creating her own version of events and expecting everyone else to accept it. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, not because I thought I needed their permission. I went because I wanted every statement made in that room to be remembered. The meeting was held inside a small community center near the entrance of Silver Creek Estates. The room smelled like old coffee and printer paper. Residents filled the chairs while Victoria stood at the front with a presentation displayed behind her. A picture of my property appeared on the screen. That bothered me more than I expected. Seeing my land presented as part of their project felt strange, like watching someone describe your home as if they had already claimed it. Victoria spoke confidently about improving access and creating better connections between neighborhoods. She never once mentioned that the land belonged to someone outside their community plan. When it was my turn, I stood up and kept my voice calm. I explained the property boundaries. I explained the records. I explained that I had already requested they stay off my land. For a moment, the room was silent. Some neighbors looked surprised. Others looked uncomfortable. Victoria simply leaned forward and said, "Ethan, you are making this more complicated than it needs to be." That sentence stayed with me, because it revealed exactly how she thought. She believed the problem was not what they were doing. She believed the problem was that I refused to accept it. After the meeting ended, an older neighbor named Harold stopped me outside. He lowered his voice and said, "I have lived here for 20 years. I have seen people question her decisions before, but I have never seen anyone actually check the records." I thanked him and drove home under the fading Colorado sunset. That night, I opened my files again. I was no longer just protecting my property. I was protecting the truth about it. And the more I looked, the more I realized Victoria had made one very important mistake. She assumed I was fighting to keep something. She did not realize I was preparing to prove something. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky over Colorado was still gray, and a thin layer of fog rested across the fields behind my house. I stood on the porch holding my coffee, listening to the quiet sounds I had known for years. The wind moving through the trees, the soft creak of the old wooden steps, the distant sound of birds waking up. It was peaceful, but I knew that peace was being tested. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, my phone received a new message from the HOA office. Another notice. Another attempt to make me believe they had control over something they did not own. This time, they claimed my refusal to cooperate was creating unnecessary delays for the community. I stared at the screen for a moment and shook my head. They had changed the wording, but the message was the same. They wanted me to surrender simply because it was easier for them. Instead of responding immediately, I decided to do something different. I contacted a property attorney named Daniel Whitmore, someone recommended by a longtime friend who understood land disputes. I brought every document I had collected: the old survey maps, the property records, the letters from Victoria, the photographs. Daniel sat quietly as he reviewed everything. The only sound in his office was the turning of pages. After nearly an hour, he looked up and said, "Ethan, the paperwork is very clear. The question is not whether you own this land. The question is why they believed nobody would challenge them." That sentence explained everything. Victoria was not confused. She was confident because she had probably dealt with people who gave up before looking deeper. Daniel helped me send a formal response to Silver Creek Estates. The letter explained the property boundaries, referenced the documents, and requested that all activity on my land stop immediately. For the first time, I felt like the situation was moving from a personal disagreement into something based on facts. I thought that would be enough. I was wrong. 3 days later, I noticed something while checking the security footage from the driveway camera. A member of the HOA had walked onto the edge of my property again. He was not there for long, but the camera captured everything clearly: the time, the location, the direction he walked. I saved the recording immediately. Then I checked the previous days. More footage appeared. Different visits. Different people. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. They were not making one mistake. They were continuing the same action after being told to stop. That night, I sat at my desk with the old folder from my father beside me. The room was quiet except for the sound of the ceiling fan turning above me. I looked at the documents and thought about how easily people can be intimidated by official-looking letters and confident voices. But ownership is not decided by who speaks the loudest. It is decided by records, evidence, and the truth. Victoria thought I was trying to win an argument with her. She did not understand that I was building something much stronger. I was building a case, and every decision she made was becoming part of it. The following week felt different, not because anything dramatic happened, but because I could feel the situation changing. There is a certain silence that comes before a storm, and I noticed it every morning when I stepped outside. The mountains were still the same. The old oak tree still stood near the property line. The gravel driveway still made that familiar crunch beneath my boots. But now, every detail mattered. Every mark on the ground. Every vehicle that stopped near my land. Every message that arrived in my inbox. I was no longer just watching my property. I was watching the people who believed they could take control of it. Daniel Whitmore called me on Monday morning with an update. He had reviewed additional county records connected to the property. "Ethan, there is something you should see," he said. I drove to his office that afternoon with the same folder my father had kept for decades. The room smelled like paper and coffee, and stacks of legal documents covered his desk. Daniel opened a copy of an old survey map from 1984. Then he placed another document beside it. A recorded property agreement from the original purchase. "Look closely here," he said, pointing to a section near the boundary description. I leaned forward and read the words carefully. The access area Victoria wanted to use was not just outside the HOA control. It was specifically protected as private property with no shared community access rights. I felt a strange combination of relief and frustration. Relief because the truth was clear. Frustration because Victoria had every opportunity to stop before things went this far. She had received my letters. She had seen the boundary markers. She had been told directly. But instead of checking the facts, she continued moving forward. Daniel explained that the documents alone were important, but the strongest part of the situation was the pattern. The notices, the visits, the attempts to treat my land as if it belonged to the community. They created a record against themselves, he said. That sentence stayed with me. A record against themselves. For weeks, Victoria believed every action she took made her position stronger. She did not realize that every email, every notice, and every unauthorized visit was showing a completely different story. That evening, I walked the property as the sun started disappearing behind the mountains. The air was cool, and the grass moved slowly in the wind. I stopped near the old oak tree where my father and I had checked the boundary line many times. I remembered him telling me that land ownership was not just about having a name on a document. It was about responsibility, taking care of what was entrusted to you, protecting what mattered. I went back inside and organized everything one more time. The photographs were labeled. The documents were sorted. The timeline was complete. I was not angry anymore. Anger makes people rush. I wanted to be patient. I wanted every step to be precise. Because Victoria had made one mistake from the beginning. She thought this was a battle over a piece of land. She did not understand that it was a battle over facts. And facts have a way of waiting quietly until the right moment to speak. For the first time in weeks, I stopped trying to convince Victoria Harrington to understand. I realized something important. You cannot explain the value of truth to someone who has already decided their version of the story matters more. So I changed my approach. I stopped responding emotionally. I stopped trying to win conversations. Instead, I started preparing quietly. Every morning, I checked the security cameras before leaving the house. Every evening, I reviewed the footage and updated my records. The process was simple. Date, time, location, what happened. No opinions, no assumptions, just facts. A few days later, something happened that showed me exactly how confident Victoria had become. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I received an email from the HOA office. They announced that construction would begin on the access project the following Monday. They included a timeline, a list of planned improvements, and even a digital rendering showing how the area would look when finished. I stared at the screen for a long moment. They were not asking anymore. They were moving forward as if the decision had already been made. I forwarded the email to Daniel immediately. His response came within minutes. "This is exactly what we needed." That sentence caught my attention. I called him and asked what he meant. Daniel explained that their confidence was actually helping my case. The more they documented their intentions, the clearer their actions became. They were creating a complete record showing they knew about the dispute and continued anyway. That afternoon, I walked outside with my camera and photographed the entire boundary area. The orange survey flags, the existing markers, the old oak tree, the gravel path, everything that showed where my property ended and where their authority stopped. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the field. I remember standing there and thinking about how strange the situation had become. A place that had always represented peace had turned into a lesson about patience and preparation. The next morning, I received another visit from Victoria. She arrived alone this time. Her vehicle stopped near the driveway, and she walked toward me carrying a folder. "Ethan, I want to give you one final opportunity to cooperate," she said. Her tone was calm, but I could hear the certainty behind every word. I looked at the folder in her hand. "Cooperate? With what?" I asked. She opened it and showed me another HOA document. It was filled with references to community benefits and neighborhood standards. But none of those words changed one simple fact. They still did not own my land. I handed the document back to her. "Victoria, I have been clear from the beginning. You do not have permission to use this property." She looked at me for a few seconds, then smiled slightly. "You really think paperwork is going to stop this?" I did not answer immediately. I simply looked past her toward the boundary marker near the old oak tree. Because at that moment, I knew something she did not. Paperwork was exactly what was going to stop this. She thought documents were tools for control. She was about to discover they could also be tools for accountability. The following Monday arrived with a strange sense of certainty. I woke up before sunrise, walked outside with my coffee, and looked across the property line. The air was cold, and the morning fog covered the field like a thin blanket. For years, this view had represented peace. That morning, it represented something else. It was the moment when everything Victoria Harrington had done would finally be measured against the facts. At exactly 8:15 in the morning, I saw vehicles from Silver Creek Estates arrive near the edge of my land. A construction crew stepped out and began unloading materials. I did not panic. I did not rush outside. I simply picked up my phone, opened the camera, and started documenting. The sound of equipment moving across the gravel driveway filled the air. The same driveway my father built by hand decades earlier. The same driveway Victoria had decided was part of her community plan. I watched for a few minutes, then sent the footage to Daniel. His response was simple. "Do not interfere. Let them show exactly what they are doing." That was the hardest part. Every instinct told me to walk out there and demand answers. But I remembered what Daniel said. Facts are stronger when they are complete. So I stayed calm. I collected evidence. I let every decision they made become part of the record. Around noon, Daniel arrived with a printed copy of the latest property documents. He stood beside me near the old oak tree and looked across the field. "This is the moment they cannot explain away," he said. The crew was still working in the distance. Victoria was not there, but her instructions were clear through the paperwork they had submitted. She had approved the project. She had authorized the access plan. She had continued after receiving formal notice. That afternoon, Daniel prepared the next legal step. A formal request to stop the unauthorized activity and a complete package of supporting evidence. The folder had grown thick. Every letter, every email, every photograph, every recording, all of it told the same story. The story of someone who believed confidence could replace permission. 2 days later, Victoria called me. Her voice sounded different, less certain than before. "Ethan, I think we should discuss this situation before it becomes more complicated." I sat at my desk looking at the documents spread out in front of me. "Victoria, I have been trying to discuss this from the beginning." There was a pause. For the first time, she did not have an immediate response. She started explaining that the HOA had only wanted to improve the area. She said nobody intended to cause problems. But intentions were not the issue anymore. Actions were. I looked out the window toward the land my family had protected for decades. "Victoria, this was never about improving my property. It was about using it without permission. The conversation ended shortly after that. She did not apologize. She did not admit she was wrong. But something had changed. The confidence was gone. That evening, I organized the final documents for Daniel. The folder my father started decades ago now held everything needed to protect what he built. And as I placed the final page inside, I realized something important. Victoria thought she was fighting against one homeowner. She did not realize she had created a situation where every piece of evidence was standing together on my side. The day the decision came in, I woke up before my alarm. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. The soft sound of the wind moved through the trees outside my window. The coffee machine hummed in the kitchen. The mountains in the distance were covered with the first light of morning. Then I remembered. Today was the day we would finally find out if the facts mattered. I drove to Daniel Whitmore's office carrying the same folder I had carried for weeks. The folder my father started decades ago. The folder that began with a simple property survey and ended with every piece of evidence showing exactly what happened. Daniel was already waiting when I arrived. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers being organized on his desk. He looked at me and smiled slightly. "Ethan, you were right to be patient. We reviewed everything one final time. The original property records, the boundary surveys, the letters I sent, the notices from the HOA, the photographs, the security footage, every piece connected to the next. It was not one document that told the story. It was the entire timeline. That was what made it impossible to ignore." Later that morning, we met with representatives from Silver Creek Estates. Victoria Harrington walked into the room with the same professional appearance she always had. But something was different. She was quieter. The confidence that once filled every conversation was replaced by careful words and long pauses. Daniel placed the documents on the table one by one. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The facts were already speaking. He explained that the property was privately owned and that the HOA had no authority to use the land for their project. He explained that Victoria had been notified multiple times and continued despite knowing there was a dispute. Victoria looked through the documents in front of her. For the first time, she was not controlling the conversation. She was responding to it. The final decision required the HOA to stop the project on my property and remove the materials that had been placed there. They were also responsible for covering the costs connected to correcting their mistake. I remember walking back outside afterward and standing near the old oak tree. The same tree where my father taught me the importance of respecting boundaries. The afternoon sun warmed the field, and the air smelled like pine and fresh grass. For the first time in weeks, the property felt peaceful again. A few days later, the sign that had been placed near my driveway was removed. The orange survey flags disappeared. The area returned to the way it had always been. Not because I had forced anyone to listen, because the truth had finally been impossible to ignore. Victoria had believed that authority came from a title and a position. She believed a group of people could simply decide something belonged to them. But ownership does not disappear because someone speaks confidently. It does not change because a document has an official logo at the top. My father taught me that protecting something important does not always require anger. Sometimes it requires patience, preparation, and the courage to stand quietly until the facts are ready. Looking across that land again, I understood something I would never forget. The strongest response is not always the loudest one. Sometimes justice arrives slowly, carrying nothing but the truth.